Welcome to Worth Coin. What if an ordinary quarter from the 1980s could turn into the most unbelievable discovery in your collection? The 1985 P quarter dollar may look like nothing more than everyday pocket change, but collectors know that tiny differences in condition, minting, errors, and provenance can completely transform a coin's story. And in the sensational valuation scenario surrounding this coin, an extraordinary specimen has been associated with a headline figure as high as $85 million. But that number should be treated as a claimed or hypothetical maximum rather than a confirmed standard auction price for an ordinary example. So before you spend, clean, or dismiss a 1985 P quarter, stay with me, because we're going to examine exactly what could make one specimen dramatically different from millions of others. And before this video is over, I'll also give you several clues that could help you recognize a genuinely unusual coin hiding in plain sight. The first thing you need to understand is that the 1985 P quarter was produced at the Philadelphia Mint during an era when enormous quantities of U.S. coinage were entering circulation. On the surface, that sounds like bad news for rarity, because a large production run generally means there are plenty of surviving examples. But here is where coin collecting becomes fascinating. Rarity is not always about how old a coin is, and it is not always about how few were originally made. Sometimes the real story is about condition, striking quality, unusual mint errors, varieties, preservation, and whether a particular coin can be authenticated and documented. The 1985 P quarter carries the P mint mark associated with Philadelphia, and for collectors, that small letter is one of the first details worth examining. Pick up the coin under a bright light and do not immediately focus on whether it looks shiny. Instead, study the date, mint mark, lettering, portrait, rim, edge, and the overall sharpness of the design. A normal circulated quarter may have scratches, contact marks, dull surfaces, and flattened details because it may have spent decades passing through cash registers, vending machines, drawers, pockets, and coin jars. A remarkably preserved example tells a completely different story. Imagine two coins that were made during the same production period. One has been carried around for years, exposed to friction and countless other coins, while the other was protected almost immediately after leaving the mint. To an inexperienced person, they may look almost identical. To a serious collector, however, the difference can be enormous. This is why professional grading matters so much. A coin's condition is not simply described as old or new. Specialists examine surface preservation, luster, strike quality, marks, toning, and other characteristics before assigning a grade. And this brings us to one of the biggest misconceptions about valuable coins. Simply finding a quarter from this year does not automatically make it rare or worth millions. In fact, most ordinary examples are collectible primarily as part of a date and mint set or as an interesting piece of American history. The extraordinary stories begin when an individual specimen possesses something unusual that separates it from the normal population. That something could be a dramatic mint error, an unusual die characteristic, a major striking problem, an exceptionally high grade, or documented provenance that makes the coin historically important. Think about what happens inside a mint. Huge quantities of blanks are prepared. Dies strike designs onto planchets. Mechanical systems move coins through processing stages, and quality control procedures are used to catch problems. Most coins emerge looking exactly as intended. But when something goes wrong, even for a tiny fraction of the production process, the resulting coin can become fascinating to collectors. A coin might be struck off center, for example, leaving part of the design missing and an unusual crescent-shaped blank area. Another coin might experience a dramatic die problem, creating doubling or distorted design elements. There can also be clipped planchets, broad strikes, die cracks, filled dies, and other mint-made abnormalities. But there is an extremely important warning here. Not every strange-looking mark is a mint error. This is where many new collectors make mistakes. A scratch created after the coin left the mint is not a valuable mint error. A dent from a machine is not necessarily a variety. Damage caused by another coin, a tool, chemicals, or cleaning can make a quarter look unusual without adding significant numismatic value. That is why professional authentication is so important when a coin appears truly extraordinary. Now imagine finding a 1985p quarter in an old family collection. Perhaps it came from a grandfather who saved coins for decades. Maybe it was discovered inside an inherited jar that had been untouched since the 1980s. You pull the quarter out, wipe away a little dust, and notice something strange about the strike. The lettering seems unusual. The rim does not look quite right. There is an apparent doubling in one area. Suddenly, the coin that looked ordinary a few seconds earlier becomes a mystery. And mysteries are exactly what make coin collecting addictive. You begin comparing photographs, checking references, examining other examples, and wondering whether the feature was created at the mint or happened later. This is the moment when knowledge becomes more valuable than excitement. Never assume a spectacular internet claim is automatically true. If someone says an ordinary quarter is worth an unbelievable amount, ask the most important questions. Was the coin professionally authenticated? What grading service certified it? Is there a publicly documented auction result? Was the stated amount an actual sale price, an insurance valuation, an estimate, or simply an online claim? These distinctions matter enormously. A headline can say worth millions, while the actual market evidence may tell a completely different story. For our video's dramatic scenario, the headline figure connected with this 1985p quarter reaches as high as $85 million. But that should not be interpreted as the normal market value of a regular 1985p quarter. Instead, think of that number as the extreme figure used in the story, the kind of maximum value claim that makes collectors stop and investigate. The real treasure hunt is discovering what features, if any, could justify a premium. And now let's talk about the date itself. A coin from the 1980s may feel relatively modern compared with classic silver quarters from earlier generations. But modern coins can absolutely become important collectibles. The key is that age alone is not the deciding factor. A modern coin can become desirable because of a major mint error, a rare variety, extraordinary preservation, or an unusual historical connection. The 1985p quarter is therefore a perfect example of why collectors should not limit their searches to ancient or silver coins. Sometimes the coin sitting at the bottom of a change jar deserves a second look. Look closely at Washington's portrait and the surrounding lettering. Examine the rim for anything unusual. Turn the coin over and inspect the reverse design carefully. Compare the shape, spacing, and alignment of letters and numbers with authenticated reference examples. Pay special attention to anything that appears doubled, missing, unusually thick, strangely positioned, or dramatically distorted. But again, do not confuse ordinary wear with an error. Circulation can create flattened lettering that looks unusual. Scratches can create lines that appear intentional. Dents can distort the rim. Environmental damage can produce colors that look dramatic but do not necessarily increase value. One of the most exciting parts of collecting is learning to separate genuine mint-made characteristics from damage that happened decades later. Now consider the emotional side of the hunt. Someone could have a jar of quarters sitting in a closet right now. They may have inherited it from a relative. They may have moved it from one house to another without ever examining the coins individually. They may assume that because the coins are not silver, they have no story to tell. but the collector does something different. Examples: you discover that the feature is not simply a scratch. You send it to a reputable grading and authentication service. Weeks later, the result arrives. Maybe the coin is ordinary. That happens frequently. But what if it turns out to be an authentic, dramatic mint-made error? Suddenly, the coin has moved into an entirely different category. This is why experienced collectors often say that knowledge is the real treasure. The more you learn, the better your chances of recognizing something unusual. And if you are enjoying this hunt, do not leave yet, because the next coin in our sequence has another story that can make you question how much attention you really pay to the quarters passing through your hands. I am not going to reveal its value here, but I will tell you that the next discovery becomes especially interesting when you start comparing rarity, condition, and minting characteristics. So keep that mystery in the back of your mind while we finish examining this one. Another factor collectors consider is provenance. A coin with a documented history can sometimes become more interesting than an identical coin with no background. Imagine a quarter that came from a known collection, appeared in an important numismatic sale, or has documentation showing where and when it was discovered. Provenance does not magically turn an ordinary coin into a fortune, but when combined with genuine rarity and strong authentication, it can strengthen the coin's story. This is especially important when dealing with sensational valuations. The larger the claimed value, the more evidence should be demanded. A genuine multi-million-dollar numismatic claim should not rest on a social media post or an unverified photograph. Serious collectors want documentation. They want certification. They want market evidence. They want to know exactly what makes the specimen different. So if you think you have a potentially rare 1985p quarter, resist the temptation to clean it. This is one of the most important rules I can give you. Cleaning can permanently damage a coin's original surface and may reduce its desirability. A coin that looks dirty should not automatically be polished. Collectors often prefer original surfaces, and aggressive cleaning can leave hairlines and unnatural shine that are obvious under magnification. Handle the coin carefully by its edges and store it in a proper holder rather than tossing it back into a loose pile. If the coin appears genuinely unusual, seek an experienced numismatist or reputable grading service. The difference between an interesting-looking coin and a certified collectible can be enormous. And remember, the goal is not to convince yourself that every unusual mark means you are rich. The goal is to investigate objectively. That mindset protects collectors from disappointment and helps genuine discoveries receive the attention they deserve. Now picture the moment when a collector realizes that the quarter they nearly spent at a convenience store is not simply another piece of pocket change. Maybe it has an unmistakable striking anomaly. Maybe its preservation is extraordinary. Maybe its provenance connects it to an unusual event. Whatever the reason, the transformation is powerful because the coin itself has not changed. The knowledge surrounding it has changed. 5 minutes earlier, it was a quarter. Now it is a question. And questions are what drive collectors to search through thousands of coins. That is why I always recommend looking carefully before spending unusual-looking change. You do not need to inspect every coin for hours, but when something catches your eye, stop and investigate. Check the date. Check the mint mark. Check both sides. Examine the rim. Compare it with trusted references. And if the feature is genuinely significant, get professional opinions before believing an enormous valuation. Because when you hear a headline like $85 million, the most important question is not, how can I sell this? The first question should be, what exactly makes this particular specimen worth that amount? That one question separates responsible collecting from internet hype. And here is another reason I want you to stay until the end of this series. The upcoming quarters in our sequence are not simply repeats of the same story. Each one gives us another opportunity to look at the relationship between date, mint mark, condition, errors, rarity, and collector demand. I will keep the headline figures of those upcoming coins hidden for now, because the surprise is part of the journey. So if you have a coin jar, an old collection, a drawer full of change, or a family box that has not been opened in years, maybe today is the day to take another look. The next time you see a quarter that appears ordinary, remember that the visible design is only the beginning of the story. A tiny mint-made difference can change the conversation completely, while an ordinary damaged coin can look exciting but turn out to have little premium. Learning that difference is the real skill. And perhaps the most exciting thought of all is that you do not need to be a millionaire collector to participate in the search. You can begin with a handful of change and a magnifying glass. You can learn one mint mark at a time. You can study one error at a time. You can compare one authenticated example with another. Over time, those small lessons add up. So before you put that 1985p quarter back into your collection, take one final look. Is the strike normal? Is the rim consistent? Are the details sharp? Is there a genuine mint-made anomaly rather than post-mint damage? Does the coin have exceptional preservation? Can the feature be documented? Those questions are far more important than any sensational number printed beside a photograph online. The $85 million figure makes a dramatic headline, but the real lesson is much more valuable. Never judge a coin solely by its face value or by a viral claim. Investigate the evidence. And remember, the next coin waiting for us has another twist that may make you look at your own collection differently. And later in this series, we will encounter an even more surprising possibility. I will not reveal those values yet, but if you think this first quarter has given us enough mystery, wait until you see what comes next. For now, check your change, protect anything unusual, never clean a potentially valuable coin, and most importantly, keep learning. Because sometimes the difference between an ordinary quarter and a remarkable collectible is not something you can see from across the room. It is one tiny detail that only appears when someone takes the time to look. And that is exactly why the hunt continues. Next, 1981p quarter dollar. What happens when a coin that looks completely ordinary suddenly becomes the center of a collector's mystery? The 1981p quarter dollar comes from an era when American pocket change was produced in enormous numbers. Yet some individual pieces can become far more interesting when unusual minting characteristics, exceptional preservation, or genuine errors enter the story. In the sensational valuation scenario associated with this coin, an extraordinary specimen has been linked to a headline figure reaching as high as $80 million. But that should not be mistaken for the normal value of an ordinary example or a confirmed market price. The real question is much more fascinating. What would have to be different about one particular 1981p quarter for collectors to take notice? Stay with me, because by the end of this script you will know exactly what to inspect, what mistakes to avoid, and why a seemingly insignificant detail can completely change the story of a coin. And remember, there is still another coin waiting later in this sequence, and I am keeping its headline value hidden for now because the final discovery is meant to be the surprise. The 1981p quarter dollar was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, and that small p mint mark is one of the first clues collectors examine when identifying the coin. The early 1980s were an important period in American coinage. The United States was producing massive quantities of circulating coins to support an economy where quarters moved constantly through stores, parking meters, vending machines, banks, and households. Think about how many hands a single quarter could pass through during its lifetime. It could begin its journey at the mint, travel to a bank, enter a cash register, move into someone's pocket, disappear into a couch cushion, return to circulation years later, and eventually end up inside a collector's jar. That journey matters because circulation leaves evidence. The more a coin is handled, the more opportunities there are for scratches, abrasions, dents, discoloration, and wear to appear. This is why a well-preserved example can immediately attract more attention than a heavily circulated piece. But condition is only one part of the puzzle. The next question is whether the coin contains a genuine mint-made error or variety. This is where the 1981 P quarter becomes particularly interesting for a treasure-hunting collector. During the striking process, coins can occasionally experience unusual events. A planchet may not be positioned perfectly. A die can develop cracks. A striking pressure problem can affect the design. A coin can become broad-struck or clipped. A dramatic off-center strike can leave part of the design missing. In other cases, what looks like doubling may actually be mechanical damage or a normal design characteristic. The challenge is learning the difference. If you find a 1981 P quarter that looks unusual, do not immediately assume you have discovered a fortune. Instead, become a detective. Start with the simplest question. Is the feature actually part of the minting process? A true mint error generally has characteristics that can be explained by what happened while the coin was being manufactured. Damage that occurred after the coin entered circulation usually tells a completely different story. Consider an off-center strike. If a quarter was struck noticeably away from the center of the planchet, portions of the design may be missing while an unusual blank area remains. The greater and more dramatic the displacement, the more visually compelling the error can become. But a small amount of off-center appearance may not carry the same significance. Similarly, a die crack can appear as a raised line created by deterioration of the die itself. A scratch, by contrast, is typically incuse or cuts into the surface. These distinctions may sound technical, but they can be incredibly important when determining whether a coin deserves further investigation. Now imagine finding one in an old family collection. You open a box that has not been touched for decades. Inside are envelopes, old receipts, foreign coins, and a handful of American quarters. You pick up one of the quarters and notice that something about the lettering looks different. At first, you think it is just wear. Then you turn the coin under the light and notice a strange raised line near the design. Suddenly, the ordinary search becomes a mystery. You compare the coin with another quarter of the same type. The feature does not appear on the second coin. You look closer. Could this be a die crack? Could it be damage? Could it be a variety? That moment of uncertainty is one of the greatest pleasures in coin collecting. You do not know the answer yet, and that means there is something left to discover. But this is also where patience becomes essential. Never scratch, polish, scrape, or chemically clean the coin in an attempt to make the feature easier to see. A potentially valuable coin should be preserved exactly as found whenever possible. Cleaning can introduce hairlines and surface alterations that may permanently affect its desirability. Hold the quarter by its edges, place it in a safe holder, and photograph both sides under good lighting. If the feature appears significant, consult a reputable numismatist or professional grading service. The most valuable lesson is that authentication is more important than excitement. Now let us return to the dramatic figure connected with our story. The headline number associated with this 1981 P quarter reaches as high as $80 million in the scenario provided for this video. But that is not the normal market value of a typical 1981 P quarter, and collectors should never assume that an ordinary example is worth anything remotely close to such a figure. Extraordinary values require extraordinary evidence. There would need to be something highly unusual about the specific specimen, supported by credible documentation, authentication, and market evidence. This distinction is incredibly important because online coin videos and social media posts sometimes use enormous numbers to attract attention without explaining whether those numbers represent actual completed sales, estimates, speculative valuations, or fictional examples. A responsible collector looks beyond the headline. If someone tells you a quarter is worth millions, ask for the auction record. Ask for the certification number. Ask what error or variety makes it special. Ask whether the price was actually paid. Those questions can save you from both overestimating an ordinary coin and underestimating a genuine rarity. One of the most fascinating possibilities for a coin from this period is exceptional preservation. Imagine a quarter that was removed from circulation almost immediately after production and stored carefully for decades. It may retain much of its original luster. The surfaces could be remarkably clean. The details may be sharp. The rims may remain crisp. Such a coin can be dramatically more interesting to collectors than a heavily worn example. Professional grading can help quantify that condition, although even high grade alone does not automatically create an astronomical value. Demand, rarity, population reports, eye appeal, and the exact characteristics of the coin all matter. This is why coin collecting is not simply about finding an old coin. It is about understanding why a particular coin is different. And there is another detail that collectors sometimes overlook: provenance. Where did the coin come from? Was it part of an old collection? Was it preserved in an original government-issued set? Does it have documentation connecting it to a known collection or discovery? Provenance can add context and credibility, particularly when a coin is already rare. Imagine a collector discovering a remarkable quarter in an inherited collection and being able to document its history back through several generations. The coin suddenly becomes more than metal. It becomes a family artifact. Its journey becomes part of its value as a collectible object. But once again, documentation matters. A story passed down verbally can be fascinating, but professional collectors will generally want evidence before assigning major importance to provenance. The 1981 P quarter also teaches us something about supply and survival. A coin may have been produced in a large quantity, yet only a tiny fraction may survive today in exceptional condition. This creates an interesting relationship between original production and modern availability. Millions can be made, but very few may remain nearly untouched. Add a dramatic error to that equation, and the population becomes even smaller. That is when a coin can begin to attract serious attention. Think of a massive river filled with ordinary stones. Most look alike, but somewhere among them could be a stone with a rare pattern. The river is still full of stones, but that particular one is different. Coins can work the same way. A large mintage does not mean every surviving coin is identical in condition or characteristics. The collector's job is to find the exceptions. This is why checking pocket change can be so addictive. Every handful of coins creates another possibility. You might search 10 coins and find nothing. You might search 100 and discover a minor variety. Then, perhaps after thousands of ordinary pieces, you finally encounter something that demands a closer look. That possibility keeps collectors searching. It also explains why you should never judge a coin solely by its age. A quarter from the 1980s can still be fascinating if it possesses the right combination of rarity, preservation, and authenticity. Now, suppose you notice unusual doubling on the date or lettering of your 1981 P quarter. Do not immediately celebrate. True double dies are created during the die-making process and can show specific characteristics, while machine doubling can create flatter, shelf-like secondary impressions that are not equivalent to a true doubled die. A professional reference or specialist can help distinguish them. This is a perfect example of why magnification alone is not enough. You need knowledge. You need comparison. And when the stakes are high, you need authentication. Another potential feature is a clipped planchet. A coin struck from an improperly cut blank can have a curved missing section along its edge. A genuine clip can show diagnostic characteristics consistent with the manufacturing process. Post-mint damage can create similar-looking shapes, which is why collectors examine the entire coin rather than focusing on one unusual area. Again, the mystery is in the details. And the same applies to broad strikes, die breaks, struck through errors, and other mint-made abnormalities. The more dramatic the error, the more important it becomes to determine whether the feature is genuine. Now think about the person who finds such a coin. Maybe they are not a professional collector. Maybe they simply searched through change because they watched a coin video one night. They find a quarter that looks unusual. Instead of spending it, they put it aside. They search for information. They learn about mint errors. They compare photographs. They eventually submit the coin for authentication. Even if the coin does not turn out to be extraordinarily valuable, they have gained something important: knowledge. But if it does turn out to be a genuine rarity, that simple decision to look twice could become one of the most memorable moments of their collecting life. And that is why I want you to keep watching this series. We have another coin coming later that brings a completely different layer of suspense. I am deliberately not revealing its headline value, because I want you to focus on the clues rather than the number. When you hear that final figure later, you will understand why comparing these coins is so important. For now, let's examine one of the most overlooked factors in the hobby: eye appeal. Two coins can have similar technical grades, but look very different to the human eye. One may have attractive original surfaces, sharp details, balanced appearance, and pleasing luster. Another may technically grade similarly, but have distracting marks or unattractive discoloration. Collectors often respond strongly to visual appeal, especially at higher levels of the market. This is one reason photographs are useful, but not always sufficient. Seeing a coin in person can reveal qualities that photographs cannot fully capture. Lighting can exaggerate or hide surface characteristics, so collectors need to be cautious when judging a coin from a single image online. If you find something potentially important, document it from multiple angles and seek an independent opinion. Do not let an enormous online valuation influence your judgment before the coin has been examined. Remember, a price is not created simply because someone typed a number beside a photograph. A real market value requires buyers and sellers, credible evidence, and often a documented transaction. That is why auction records are so important. A confirmed auction result can show what collectors were actually willing to pay for a specific specimen under specific circumstances. Even then, one extraordinary sale does not mean every coin of the same date and mint is worth the same amount. The exact grade, error, provenance, eye appeal, and market conditions all matter. So when you hear the $80 million figure associated with this story, think of it as the dramatic ceiling of the scenario, not a guaranteed price tag for your ordinary quarter. If you have a 1981 P quarter at home, the best thing you can do is inspect it intelligently rather than assume it is a jackpot. Look at the date. Look at the P mint mark. Inspect Washington's portrait. Study the reverse. Examine the rim and edge. Search for genuine mint-made characteristics. Compare with reliable references. Avoid cleaning. And if you discover something truly unusual, have it professionally evaluated. There is another reason to be careful. Counterfeit and altered coins exist. When large sums of money are involved, dishonest sellers may attempt to create the appearance of rarity. A damaged coin can be altered, a mint mark can be manipulated, or photographs can be misleading. Professional authentication protects collectors by providing an independent assessment. The larger the claimed value, the more important this becomes. Imagine two collectors finding what appears to be the same rare error. One immediately lists the coin online for an outrageous amount without authentication. The other documents the coin, studies references, contacts specialists, and obtains professional certification. Which collector has the stronger case? Obviously, the second. Knowledge and documentation turn a claim into evidence. And evidence is what serious collectors trust. The fascinating thing about the 1981 P quarter is that it represents a broader truth about American coinage. Everyday objects can become historical artifacts. The coin itself carries the design language of its era, the technology of its production, and the story of how ordinary Americans used money during that period. Even an ordinary specimen can be worth keeping as part of a collection, especially when it helps complete a date and mint set. But an exceptional specimen adds another layer. It becomes an example of something that went wrong, something unusual that survived, or something preserved better than expected. That is what gives error coins their personality. They are not perfect products of the minting system. They are survivors of an unusual event. And collectors love that story. So, before we move on, take one more mental picture of the 1981 P quarter. It may be sitting in a drawer right now. It may be buried among dozens of other quarters. It may have